Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who likes to think of himself as a gold elite, but is really a trash mob.
Tim Longo. No, I pretty much consider myself a trash mob.
Trash mob. Yeah. I don't know. I was thinking you might be like one of those goblins with the earring. At least you were at the time, as some folks saw from our Twitter feed.
Oh, no. Yeah, that was embarrassing. I did eventually watch that. That was embarrassing for all sorts of folks, in fact.
Yes, it was. I look exactly the same.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I think you kind of do, don't you?
I kind of do. My hair is a little bit further back on my temples and a little thinner generally, but other than that, I do. I look pretty similar.
Yeah. That was the raw footage of I didn't realize that. I started watching. I was like, "What is going on?" It's the pre-edit. I didn't read the description, so that was the pre-edit.
Yeah, that was a pre-edit. So for those who don't know what the heck we're talking about, on the Twitter feed for Dev Game Club, I reposted something, a YouTube link for I guess it was for Gladius, the video game. There was an in-house, like we used to do for the company meetings. Teams would go up and would present stuff, usually video, and then maybe a producer would come on or the project leader and talk about what their game was about. But there was sort of a one-upmanship a little bit about how you introed your game to the company. They were often funny and whatever. And this one involved Gladius's main enemy at work at LucasArts, as if he worked there. So they animated him into all these scenes, but they did these scenes as if he was walking around the building. So they took Mike Terpstra, who was an effects artist, later ended up working in film effects. He at Tippett Studios, I think. He walked around. He's fairly tall, so he walked around as this like 6'2", enemy. And it was from his perspective, and different people in the office would get out of his way or notice him passing or whatever. A lot of Alex Noisy, who we've mentioned on the cast, but he also walked through the Jedi Starfighter area at the time. This would have been probably in the summer of 2002, guessing from the lighting and et cetera, and how calm we all look, relatively speaking. So, yeah, right. Terps had worked with us on one or both of those games, and I think maybe he worked on the first one. Anyway, hello. Now that we're 3 minutes in.
Yeah, we're not here to talk about that.
Let's talk about gold elites and trash mobs in World of Warcraft. A little check-in.
Check-in episode, yep. We thought it would be nice just to, it's been a little while, and we had a nice slot after Chrono Trigger to kind of check back in. We had been playing a little bit since the last time, and I actually played, I think, a little bit more and caught up. So we basically have hit 10 more levels since the last episode, I think, and done a couple more zones and one dungeon, which was similar to our first couple episodes. So we might keep checking in, though I think potentially, and the topics will start running out a little bit for a while, and until and if, which probably is a never really, we ever get to end game content, which I just don't think is feasible. But so we'll just keep play it by ear. But yeah, it's still something good to check in on. Classic is still, to me, a gaming miracle for me.
It really is, yeah.
It's just something that is so rare that no company does. And as we talked about before, probably, I don't remember, came out of almost a community sort of need that was already happening because the community had sort of created some illegal servers, essentially offline, servers that you could, not offline, but private servers that you could play Classic. And of course, Activision Blizzard would not want that, so they did it themselves. And so you can see where it would come from, but spending the resources on something like this still baffles me. And it's been so great to go back to a game in a time capsule that, at least for me, I still play the modern version. So it's just very fascinating. And right now I'm actually sucked back in because, as we talked about on your stream, modern WoW has like 100% XP bonus because of COVID. So yeah, I'm playing both back to back. Classic.
Oh, I was wondering how it affected tunes. It's one of the it's one of the side effects, or one of the effects, or the symptoms, I guess. Double your XP.
Double your XP, yeah, the positive side, the only positive side. So yep. Wow. So let's see. Since last time, we would have finished Westfall, right?
I think that's right. Yes, we might have been starting to dip into Redridge, but I think, and we had probably still been going back and forth to.
Dunmora.
Dunmorag, I guess.
Yeah.
The one that was sort of east of Iron
Forge.
Thank you. The names, they go straight out of my brain.
Oh yeah, no, they're start talking. My Civ catches them all somehow. And the good thing about that last session that last episode was really about Westfall sort of culminates in Deadmines, which was our first dungeon we did together, and we were a little higher level, so it kind of ended up being a breeze. But one thing that Blizzard did better than anyone else was sort of having the quests. Well, as we talked about before, just as a little bit of review, the quests themselves had more story and theme to them than something like EverQuest did. And Camelot had a little bit more, but not too much more. And then they culminate, those quest storylines culminate in usually a dungeon run of some kind. So in Westfall, it was sort of cool to have it culminate in sort of, the Defias Brotherhood sort of storylines, and the quest culminates in going inside sort of one of their sort of secret hideouts in the form of Deadmines. But that also results in sort of an extended story that brings you to the Stockades, right?
Right, because they've captured some of these Defias Brotherhood whatevers. I forget the leaders and things like that, and that's actually a really nice way to sort of make these bosses tie into the game, rather than just be sort of random tougher monsters or whatever. There's sensible reasons, right? Oh, this is the hideout for this storyline of a bunch of different. I mean, it's got lots of benefits. It's really elegant design, right? Because you basically use the same couple of character models over and over and over again, but it makes sense. They're all work together, right? I mean, they're all, even if in this particular case they're a little boring because they're all just humans and things. And that's something we'll talk about with Stockades. There's still just an elegance to how that all fits together, and it naturally leads to like a literal boss. It's the boss of that clan of Defias whatever Brotherhood, I guess. Even though they have apparently some women working for them.
Yeah,
so
not a good name. Feel about it. And they're basically thieves, right? It's like a thieves guild. And the other cool
the League of the Red Bandana,
right? The other cool thing, though, we'll get into the actual dungeon itself in a second, I'm sure, that I always loved about the idea of the Stockades, and this was actually my first time doing it in a legit way, because it actually I was telling Brett over the stream, it was the last expansion, Battle for Azeroth. They actually used the Stockades as a location for a sort of unique custom scripted quest in the opening of that expansion, because you actually go to the Stockades to break somebody out of it. So they kind of scripted this whole like mini story mission essentially. So it's kind of neat because, and I'm playing Horde side in that case. And so you actually have to break into Stormwind, and it's all scripted and very heavily done, so it's like, it's obviously not like a big deal because it's one of the opening quests. So it's really easy. God, I think that was in Battle for Azeroth. I might be getting mixed up, but it's anyway. So that was my experience with Stockades, going in there as a story quest where they just use the environment art basically. And so, but I always loved the idea of Stockades because it was in the city.
Right.
Now there is one in Orgrimmar, but it's not really, it's more of just a cave that happens to be below it. It's not really kind of fully integrated. what's it called? Ragefire Chasm, I think. And so the reasoning isn't the same. This is literally like the city dungeon, right? The city stockade. So the cool, as we were talking about with the storyline of the Defias, I just, to your point of like it making more sense and having more meaning. And if you are paying attention, which, a lot of people don't really read the quests or pay attention, but if you are like me, it makes sense that you end up sort of, taking out the leader in Deadmines, and then that leads you to Stockades, and then you go into this sort of prison uprising in the middle of the city that you're used to going back to for your city stuff, so it's clever. I just wish that the dungeon itself was was
clever. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was really surprised, and we did have, because we were streaming this on Sunday, Saturday, or whatever day, Saturday. Yeah. We had Mackenzie come in and say, "Hey, yeah, they get better," because this was probably the first instance dungeon that they did. It feels like it's very much a straight shot in and out, whereas Deadmines had felt like it forked. There was even sort of a foyer area that was mostly trash you could kind of run through and ignore. The actual mines part before you got to sort of the into the sort of machinery and deeper caves and all that stuff that went, and then finally culminating in that great pirate ship, reminiscent of the Goonies. And this had nothing. This was, I mean, it was gray setting because it's all castle stone or whatever, pointed stone. And yeah, just totally like run by a bunch of samey rooms one at a time, kill all the inhabitants as you go. There are no guards. There's nothing else going on. And then a couple sort of like little hub rooms where you fight someone named, a named boss, like a sub boss. But then even those just sponges, hit point sponges.
Yeah.
So, it was
all
pretty
humans,
bland. All human except for one Etten, I guess.
There was an
ogre mage.
Yeah, ogre. There might have been a gnome, maybe, that just because we were breezing through it so much.
We went really, really fast. We were very high level for it as well.
The other thing I was surprised by was that the bosses...
Wasn't there a two-headed thing in there?
Maybe the ogre was two-headed, yeah. That would have been a mage, yeah. I just was surprised that even, level design and construction-wise, definitely boring. But, as Mackenzie said, and I didn't do the research on this, this is actually I think it's the only dungeon I've never done legitimately, because it's in Stormwind, right? So all the rest of them,
like you can get there.
Yeah, so all the rest of them I know very well. But it does make sense this might have been one of their first ones, because Stormwind and Alliance is typically what they would work on first. But there were no boss mechanics either. Like each of the bosses well, at least maybe we were just over leveled and we weren't seeing the mechanics in play. But we had a stranger come in for our tank, and she was pulling and leading the charge, and our DPS was fine. So maybe we just didn't see him. But I didn't hear, like with Deadmines, right? Like there were even voice lines, and there was just a lot more sort of presentation put into it.
Right. I mean, you had that Tauren who would freeze you in place and stun you or whatever, and and then
go and pick a new weapon. That was a great, that
was a good battle. Yeah, and there was nothing like that here. No, and I think one of the things is that because there was nothing like freezing us in place, they didn't really have the room to do that stuff. That's probably a thing that they learned, after making it, was well, what we need is we need gaps, of time where things can happen that are storytelling, of the battle or whatever, or give a chance to see more character or what have you. Which, yeah, I don't think that that's a case of us just overwhelming it. I think that just was a lesson learned, is
They're
that
learning,
we made this thing and it's fine. I mean, it actually kind of harkens back to sort of the Warcraft 3 mod stuff, in that it sort of felt like a tower defense, except we're the ones rushing the tower.
Right.
We're running down through this whole gauntlet to get to the end boss, and then come back out, instead of it being just over at that point.
Yeah. Well, and now that I'm thinking about it, Stockades did feel like an EverQuest dungeon in a lot of ways. Like that, the simplicity of it, and really the named, for better or for worse, other than the raid bosses in EverQuest, which did have some beginnings of some sort of custom-ish mechanics, but nothing at the time, nothing like nothing like WoW, but but the concept of going down a long hallway, killing mobs along the way, and then the named mob being at the end, but with no mechanic, you're really just going down there for the loot, right? You're killing the named mob because the named mob has something, and they're really hard, and you get a lot of XP. But like, there wasn't usually very, very specific things that they were doing. So I could see how Stockades, if this was their first one, it would be riffing off of stuff that that was dominant in the space at that point. The one thing I will say that bears a small mention, that I think I talked about on the stream, the overall structure of the level is important, because it was a basically hub. It had basically wings, kind of hub and spokes. You come down the stairs, and then there is actually 3 wings, right, going off of that. And at the end of each wings, there were named. And that's important, because they do end up utilizing that structure in the future for lots of their dungeons and raids, because what it allows players to do as a group is to choose where they want to go, and essentially, like, okay, we're going to go in and raid this section. We're just going to go down this one wing and kill this one boss, and then call it for the night. And then come back later.
Yeah, the more elaborate ones, like that end game one that you called Black Rock
Depths. Which one?
Doesn't that have multiple?
Yeah,
Black Rock Spire and Black Rock Depths, and
so it allows you to
not stuff that I played, right? So I'm just kind of like, I so vaguely remember something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Those do have sections, that you can choose, and basically, like you said, forks and stuff. But the wing structure for raids specifically ended up being a bit of a revelation for allowing. It's a quality of life thing to have a sort of big dungeon that, if you really want to sink your teeth into it, you can do all the wings. But with the linear dungeons, if you want to do a certain boss, you have to go through the whole thing, right?
Right.
And so this is just maybe Stockades. I don't know this to be true, but you could see Stockades maybe being a little bit of a precursor to that mentality. Not that you needed to, because this is overall a small dungeon and you do the whole thing, but in one night. But anyway.
And we certainly did the whole thing. I mean, we blazed through that thing. That was actually one of the things I had picked up on generally was, I mean, we were over leveled for that. But just in general, what a big difference the play speed is when you are grouped. I don't know if you know this. This is not a solo game. Which is funny, because when I played it, I almost entirely played solo. I would run around and do stuff on my own, and occasionally, a small group would pop up, and I might join something to do a dungeon. But almost all the time, I would play it alone.
Yeah.
And it's really just not built for that.
Especially classic.
Especially classic, which is most of what I played. So, last evening we played as well, and we did a ton of elite questing, which we'll talk about, and that was stuff that I wouldn't probably even be able to do until I was really at the high end, of that zone, maybe even beyond that zone's level, to do solo at all. So it was certainly interesting, but we were just kind of, bang, 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 just going on that. So, the speed really changes, and the game is a lot more engaging, and the time passes more quickly when you're playing that way, because there's not a lot of downtime.
Right. Right. Yeah. Definitely. You're not resting as much, and yeah, it's really an interesting conundrum for MMOs and specifically for WoW, because WoW definitely becomes much more solo friendly in the future. And they essentially start, I think, designing the game toward really opt-in grouping, and really
Hmm.
focus on allowing you to choose whether you want to group and when. And so the content is built around that. And so, I would guess, I'm sure I've seen a statistic on this at some point, that majority of the people in the future still solo, and the game actually is much easier to solo in because respecting your character is much more easy, much easier to do.
Hmm.
And every class now has a very soloable specs. And so you can really just switch back and forth depending on whether you're going to be grouping and going dungeons or raiding, or even PvP. And then if you're soloing, you switch to the spec that really, works for soloing. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility that Classic doesn't have. But in Classic, realm, it's like, how do you design before you really have discovered that need? And as we talked about in earlier episodes, I think that, they didn't know how big this was going to be, and it caught them off guard. I think EverQuest and Camelot would probably teach people that grouping was really important to get right, but then you're putting
Hmm.
all your design resources into that problem, and you're kind of starting to leave behind the solo players. And they over time realize that they need to sort of not fix it, but just do different tactics, on how they're going to make the game, give different, basically the number of activities that modern has now compared to Classic, is quite vast. The ways you can waste your time, playing the game.
Right.
And if you just are in the mood for a solo night, then there's plenty for you to do. If you're in the mood for a dungeon night, especially with matchmaking alone, which is, was revelatory when they added that in. I forget which expansion. It might have been Wrath of the Lich King, where, as anyone on the stream saw, we had, in Classic, you have to make your own team. You have to go into the looking for a group channel. You have to do your own recruitment, and then yesterday when we played, we were attempting to try to get a group for Nomergon, and there's no way on a
If
Monday,
no one around, yeah, it
middle of
was
the
the middle of
day.
the day for a West Coast server,
Yeah.
yeah, because I'm playing on one of your servers rather than you playing on one of mine. So
Right. Yeah. And so, but now the matchmaking is automatic, like a first person shooter. And it also is cross realm, cross server. So you just hit a button, and it'll find people for you someplace on the planet. And you don't have to do any of the recruitment yourself, and it'll match up based on what spec you're coming in on, and group role, DPS,
interesting.
tank, or healer. So it's all automated, so it makes dungeoning a lot better in that regard, right? And so if you feel like you want to do a dungeon, then it's right at your fingertips, and there's not, it's a barrier of entry is a lot better.
Speaking of roles, the other thing that happens when you're grouping is that I really got the feel. I didn't get to tank when we went. I actually prefer DPS because I play as a solo player.
Yeah, sure.
So I was playing my warrior as a DPS when we did the Stockades. But when we switched to just doing some elite quests in the wetlands yesterday, I was able to actually tank more. And I actually started to feel like, oh, I get it. Like I see how I should be managing my, my rage or whatever, so that I can always pop a taunt and, all that stuff to kind of pull the aggro. It was kind of neat. I mean, I don't really have my whatever bar set up for that. So I was often like popping up the skills, window to actually choose some things that I wanted to do a little less frequently. Just got myself on that page and then I'd put it away and bring it back up. But it was fun to feel like I was learning a bit of a skill, stressful as it could be with a couple of priests. supporting me, both of you being somewhat squishy. But yeah, it was neat. It was neat to see those roles, tank. We had a Shadow Priest DPSing and you as the healer. It was cool to see those working together really well and how quickly we could go through even, decent elites to fight. So
right.
It was neat.
Yeah. And for better or for worse, which we might have talked about this a little bit before, but I think it is a good example and segue to, for better or for worse, WoW had obviously been riffing off of EverQuest and Camelot specifically and some others. WoW had basically codified the triumvirate of healer, tank, DPS, right? And I say for worse because it's, I think, to be honest, RPG, especially MMORPG, and in some cases even regular RPGs, have had a hard time breaking free of that triumvirate since then. It's become, and in fact, I think we even mentioned in one of the previous episodes talking about WoW, how it even influenced D&D, pen and paper, right? Where it just was so dominant.
Should absolutely be going the opposite direction.
Yeah, exactly. And as much as it's very easy to understand, and now you have all these players who have played multiple games where they really get what the roles that everyone has is when you're in a group, it really distills it down to a pretty, vanilla kind of, no pun intended, vanilla kind of way. And so I really am mixed on it because I do like the simplicity of it sometimes, especially when I'm playing WoW. But, then I go over to another MMO like Guild Wars 2, as I think I mentioned on the stream. Reed and I had been playing it for a while just to kind of see what it was like. And, they try to dabble with some things, but they kind of fall into the same trap of that, and luckily, offline RPGs, can fool with that a little bit more, but you see that pull even in those cases sometimes where it really comes down to, those sort of archetypes. But it is cool to hear you had mentioned that on the stream. And it is cool to hear that differentiation is kind of popping out for you because, when we were grouping yesterday, your role changes to the degree where, if we have good DPS, because we had a Shadow Priest with us, which is almost sort of rare anyway, your role turns from DPS to really all you're really doing. Because I played a protection tank as my main from the beginning of the game. All you're really doing is trying to keep things away from us. Like it's like, doesn't matter how much damage you do, doesn't matter, and it's counterintuitive, right? Especially for a warrior, because you're so used to soloing, which I was at the time too, and doing damage that now it's like you completely shift your gears, and it's sort of like the opposite problem for me when I solo, because I'm focused on healing with my priest, and when I'm playing without you, like I am lost because I am like, I come upon a quest and I'm by myself and I have, obviously I have some damage spells, but I'm not really good with the rotation for them. And I'm very squishy and I have some tricks up my sleeve, like the bubble and things like that. But it's just so cumbersome and so slow to be soloing as a healing priest. So yes, I could go and change my spec and switch to shadow or, whatever. I just couldn't be bothered. It's so silly to have to go do that. And it's not like I have stances.
And it costs a lot of money too, I think, right?
Yeah, it does eventually. Yeah, it does eventually add up, and that's money that I definitely don't have.
Right.
And that's my point as far as like modern, right, where they start allowing you to really more effortlessly respec, right? Basically, you have, like with the warrior for you have the stances are built into your class, right? You just switch stances. Right. Healers don't, priests don't have that. We literally have to respec the whole character essentially. And in modern, that's something there's a new window.
Yeah, everybody effectively has stances just by pulling up the respec screen.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as you're in a town, you can basically respect your other. Yeah. So Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, that's cool that you're kind of seeing the difference kind of pop out there even more so when you
Yeah,
definitely have to
to the
change your
point that I was
mentality.
trying to shield bash and was like, why is this not working? Oh, I gotta equip a shield.
Hmm. Exactly.
uh,
Yeah. And I think, is it at that time at Classic, when you do change stances, does your toolbar change
your toolbar
as well?
changes,
So
yes.
you
You have a
can,
toolbar for each. Yeah, you can
yeah,
customize your toolbars to
right.
the particular thing that you want to do. Yeah, because there are certain skills that are not even available to you in
Right.
different
Right.
stances.
That's
Right.
right.
So
It's been a while. I
um,
couldn't
if
remember.
it was the same one, I'd lose half of my skills that I really heavily rely on, the ones that are on like 1 through 5 or whatever.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, it was neat. It was fun. It was the way it feels like you should be running around with 3 people all the time, right? I mean, is really how it feels until you do dungeons, obviously, and
Right.
then you want to
Well,
broaden
and I
out.
think
But
I that's when I always have the most fun, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
I definitely I have way more hours soloing in WoW than anything, I'm sure too, over the last whatever 15 plus years. But still, I still get a kick out of, like last night, even just doing those elite quests that we did yesterday, with that one extra guy, and we were just doing camps essentially in a little bit of a town kind of situation,
yeah,
are still the best, because you have to, if the challenge level of what we're trying to do is correct for where we are, which I think last night was, um, it's just much more interesting and much more fun in an MMO to do that stuff. And it's fascinating to me that that's the case when, we're both pretty big RPG players in general. And it's just so different from offline RPGs, what of that. So, yeah. So what about, is there anything in, in Redridge specifically that we want to talk about? I don't, to be honest, like, I kind of felt like that was a bit of a forgettable zone. I had never really played Redridge, obviously, as a Horde player, so I didn't really know it too well. I'd probably run through there or something, but I don't remember too much about the quests themselves, that really kept me
yeah.
interested.
There's like named, a named knoll to go after, north of town. There's the lake. There's several quests that are just go into the lake and find this thing,
Yeah.
or do some fishing and things like that. So there are, you can sort of see them experimenting with different things like that. Well, let's find a reason why to do stuff near town, right? And you sort of almost see this progression from, I mean, there's a lot of that um, in and around the early zones anyway. So, well, you're not going to go far from town because you're not capable. You can't really just go on a long way. You don't have any bags, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons why you stay near town. Um, but you sort of see them kind of experimenting as they add zones with, well, let's try this. And you sort of they each have a different feel, probably based on who their lead quest designer maybe was or something like that. There's actually quite a variety of critters here.
That's true. Yeah, much more
Spiders
than
and
Westfall. Yep.
murlocs and birds and dragons and I already mentioned the gnolls. There's elite ogres in one corner, and then some orcs rather, and then some regular orcs.
Yeah.
And there's kind of gnoll progression. There's a lot more variety and interest in that, especially over Westfall, which was pretty bland.
Really, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting though.
So there are some good things with that, I guess. But
yeah, the variety was good. Yeah, there definitely was a little more interest in the space design, I'd say too, because there's that one sort of like high sort of hilly area that you actually can't even walk up. You have to kind of go around to get on top of it. Like, I hesitate to call it a mountain, but it's sort of like a mountain, where those elite orcs are and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's some more verticality, which Westfall had almost none. And in retrospect, and this is going to be me sounding biased because I'm a Horde player. But the early Alliance zones so far have been not that interesting. It feels very basic and much closer to sort of an EverQuest or a Camelot. And maybe it's just the order of operations for them that they started doing the Horde stuff later and improved pawn stuff. That, you know, the Barons definitely has gotten a bad rap, which I definitely understand. I won't get into it because we didn't play it, but I don't know. I just feel like in general, I feel like the other continent is much more interesting. The one thing I will say about Redridge that I did appreciate as a sort of WoW fan and lore fan is they start introducing the early sort of precursors to the Blackrock orcs. And so they're starting, as we've talked about, I think in previous episodes, the sort of long game of the quest lines and sort of presentation of the big nemesis characters and groups that you're going to be fighting for literally the whole game up until even beyond, you know, level cap and end game stuff. They introduce, which I love about this game, they introduce from the beginning essentially, right? So we're in this pretty low level Redridge Mountains. We're starting to fight these Blackrock orcs. There are a couple different actually elite versions of them. And, you know, that's like the Defias, that's going to be something that will carry you through to the Blackrock Spire stuff. And the bosses there, because, you know, they just get harder and harder, and you meet more and more of their leaders, and you will eventually be working up the chain of leadership, you know, and systematically taking each leader.
We started with the street level punks, and we've moved to some of the capos. Yeah.
So every 10 levels, you'll kill some leader to get you up to the 60, and eventually beyond that. So, and again, as I mentioned, I know before, having spent so much time in Blackrock Spire and all the different facets of it, because you go below it, you go above it, you go in the middle of it. It's, you know, it's really, it has sort of a grab, you know, it grabs me because I have this sort of weird, unhealthy personal connection with a fictional place in this world. And so, you know, kind of, you know, it's like any good fiction, right? You have a personal connection to it, and it kind of, it just keeps you interested, right? And kind of in awe, because you see where the humble beginnings of this villainous group started, you know, and you're going to take them out, you know, over time. And that helps especially from an MMO perspective and any good RPG perspective, it helps because you yourself are becoming more powerful over time. Right. So, yeah,
I mean, it reminds me of something like the Forgotten Realms, right? As a D&D setting where they kind of build it the same way. They're maybe a little top heavy on the names. I mean, there's so many characters in like the Forgotten Realms setting that are named and have their histories and whatever, but you have that same sort of entry into larger scale conflict going on. That these are the forces in this world, and
legendary characters and figures. I mean, that's where your campaign was taking place, right? Wasn't it the Forgotten Realms? Because you
no.
Oh, no. You mentioned Underdark.
We were in. Right. The Underdark was not that Underdark.
Oh,
okay. I'm in the original one, Greyhawk.
Oh, that's right. Okay, because you're using one of the old. Okay.
I actually just kind of pull stuff in and just take things out that don't fit. It's total mishmash.
The beauty of tabletop, but yeah, and I was a big Forgotten Realms fan, so like as you can imagine, from a lore perspective, all that stuff is really, I loved that world for the same reasons, and that's probably why. I just, you know, I love the commitment to it that WoW has, and you know, just the word Blackrock has connotations right throughout the rest of. If we continue playing, or if you know, if the proverbial you play through a game like this, you know, you just go deeper and deeper into that sort of fiction, and it just makes it, when you're in Blackrock Spire, it just makes it that much more meaningful. So that was a cool thing about Redridge. And then Duskwood. Really cool zone. I mean, visually, right? Like art direction wise.
Yes, this was the biggest contrast between art design and quest design for me so far, because the art design really pops to me. You know, it's really, really, it really stands apart really everything we've played so far as Alliance. I mean, Redridge was a little better because of that verticality they mentioned. Is a little bit more. It's kind of very clay brown, reddish brown, I guess. Obviously, Redridge, but Duskwood is really, really cool.
Yeah.
It gets very foggy. There's sort of green areas, and then there are some farms, but this whole place is kind of, it's trying to carve out of this forest, I guess. There's even some kind of night elf thing in the middle that I never really figured out. There's that.
Oh,
that
yeah, I never even
middle.
went there and uncovered that. Can we not even get in
there's
there?
there's nothing to do in there, I don't think. I don't remember there even being any mobs in there, so I don't know if that's a like plan for later type thing. But the quest design just takes you back and forth across this zone to the one town over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Which is, and a lot of it's very fetch questy. Even in particular, there's this Stalvan quest where you've got to basically go to every town you've been to before, including Goldshire, that doesn't have a griffin stop.
Yeah.
So you've got to run through, and of course, there's actually 2 quests that take you into there. And if you forget one, it's just like, it's
not good.
The quest design is not great, and then there's nothing kind of culminatory either, right? There's no dungeon, so you don't even have that sort of thing to look forward to. There is kind of a mini boss in taking down this Stalvan, and there are some cool, like you have that beast thing. What's it called? The Frankenstein critter,
not jitters.
No, I forget what it's called. Stitches, right?
He's an abomination,
yeah. That marauds into town whenever anybody triggers that quest.
What is that quest? Because we didn't end up getting that, did we? I wonder.
We don't have that. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a bummer. So yeah, like the culmination for that would have been really Stitches because he's such
something
a dominant force.
Yeah, Embalmer maybe. I don't know.
Oh, I still have an item for. Oh, so we didn't do everything. Wait, what?
Yeah, maybe we're missing something.
Yeah,
there. But that thing's too high level for us.
I have a quest
that's like a
item.
34, 35 thing.
Yeah,
so.
It's intended. I mean, that's intended to be a group of effort, really.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Stitches specifically, I always had heard sort of legendary stories about because it is. There's a mob in EverQuest that would roam through along the trail in the Dwarven area, next to the Wood Elf area, and essentially it was really high level, and it did the same thing that Stitches does. It would just take people out, newbies out, because you had to go through there. So everyone was like always calling out where it was and stuff like that. So, it's obviously a copy of that Stitches was, but Stitches is just a very memorable, silly abomination. I think they're called abomination character. And so that was neat. But I mean, the style of, it is such an interesting zone because the style of and art direction of the zone is some of their best stuff, I think, especially in Classic. And I had always, because I had obviously never done any of the quests in this zone and always had heard and seen screenshots on the Horde side of this cool place called Duskwood. So I was excited to do it. And then just really a bummer about the quest being so back and forthy and then taking you out of the zone so much. I mean, having to go all the way to Menethil Harbor and wetlands for something, and there was actually a few quests you had to do there before you can even come back, and had to go to Stormwind multiple times. So it wasn't
back and forth to Redridge. I mean,
it's too bad.
It's a shame. I mean, I love the transition from Redridge to Duskwood the first time you do it. I can remember the first time I walked down that road and into Duskwood and how the fog, that's one thing the game has always done really well is have good transition zones where you kind of slowly settle into a new feel of a place.
Music.
And this is the first time, and the music as well. This is the first time we're really seeing that as the Alliance side. I think the Horde does it sooner, better, in my recollection, but I do remember playing an Alliance character and walking down from Redridge into Duskwood and being like, oh, this is cool. And then the quests.
It's very Disneyland,
right?
Exactly.
It
feels like the haunted mansion, and I think we've talked about sort of some of their influences have definitely been based on theme park stuff. WoW is the proverbial theme park in a lot of ways. Yeah, and they've been really good at that, and it gets even better in the future, right? Each expansion they get better and better and better at it, and so I think they've got a formula down for sure. But yeah, the quests were, and the Stalvan specifically, I was really bummed about because we did that on Saturday as well, and that quest line, not only was it fetch questy, but so long and elaborate and so multifaceted.
You even have to go to that like lumber mill area, right? As I recall.
Yeah, that's actually one of the ones where you go return to a lumber mill in Elwyn Forest, and you have to it's cool.
Fight a ghost or something.
Yeah, you fight a ghost, and you have to go find this lockbox or something in this town, or in this hut or cabin rather. And I actually like some of that stuff because they really did a good job building up this myth, this legend around this Stalvan guy, right? And each person you're solving a mystery. This is my notes I wrote down, because we talked about this in previous episodes, but the sense of mystery that this quest had, right, where you're kind of like building this over time, and some of the writing was not so bad. And then you get that curse put on you pretty much like almost every step. You're cursed by the Stalvan. So it's actually built up pretty well. And I was fully expecting the Stalvan fight to be something, pretty elaborate.
Even remotely memorable. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was just this dude in a house with a couple ads, and we just did the two of us, and I don't know. It was just kind of a bummer. I thought there was another whole like castle that we had to go to and stuff like that. So
yeah, it definitely feels like it was missing, some sort of house on the hill type dungeon.
Yeah,
to culminate in for all the work that you put in as a player.
Right.
That it really felt like it needed to end up at Ravenloft Castle or something.
Right.
And it just doesn't. It just kind of, and there's a guy and he's in a little cabin and I guess he's undead or something. And you just kill him.
Yeah.
It's a weird mix. I mean, there's a ton of, that said, this whole area has a ton of sort of undead stuff, which is fun. There's that underground crypt.
I was going to say the
Ravenhill Cemetery. That
cemetery was cool. Yeah. The Embalmer thing was even more, I think, more interesting than the Stalvan thing because of the whole grave that you have.
And you're getting him basically things to help bring her back or something.
Yeah.
You don't know it until the last step when it's like, now go to the grave behind here, and he's trying to bring back Elsa, maybe, probably
kind
Bride
of very Reanimator kind of Bride of Frankenstein kind of feel to it. Yeah, and then she has ads with her, so that was kind of fun. That whole area, there was that one mob that kind of is super powerful, roaming the
Morladim.
Yeah, which is there not a quest with that? We didn't do anything with
there. There is, and I don't know if we can get it. I don't know what level it is. I don't remember.
I have to look into those because I do want to. I would love to kill Stitches at least once to feel like I've finished that zone. But I think I still have the Embalmer.
All you have to do, man, is snitch then.
Okay. Yeah. Jeez, you were that was in the chamber. You just were waiting. Like, where's the opening? Where's the opening? But yeah, it was a fun place to be, not a fun place to do things. And so that was too bad. They did introduce the Worgen, which was kind of a nice, because that's obviously they become a pretty prominent. Not only can you play as Worgen in the future, but they become a pretty prominent part of the story. The one, I don't know if you ever did it, but over in Silverpine Forest, which is on the an undead zone, probably around the same level, quest zone on the Horde side, Shadowfang Keep. Did you ever do that? Does that ring a bell? It's basically,
it does ring a bell.
It's basically like a Worgen based, like you mentioned Ravenloft. It's basically Ravenloft. It's a very cool dungeon, which probably is good for maybe our level. Maybe we should look into doing that because after Stockades, we definitely have to get a palate cleanser out there and do. I remember Nomagon being a little irritating, but we should do it at some point. But Shadowfang's really cool. I like that one a lot, and it's very gothic and like I said, Ravenlofty. And I think it's mainly, there might be some vampire stuff, I don't remember, but it's mainly Worgen based. So it's kind of fits well with Duskwood, but it's on the Horde side. The other interesting thing about the matchmaking that I just want to mention that they have in the future, there's a process of, in Classic, which I always appreciated, there's a process of going to the dungeon. You recruit through the channels, which usually are, server-ish wide, or at least, whatever side you're playing, Alliance or Horde. And you recruit, and then you all have to travel there, right? So there's this process of going to and even, in fact, they even added meeting stones at one point where I don't think they were there in the beginning.
They were not, no.
Where you can, I think you can maybe summon people there with a meeting stone. I don't remember if that's.
I think you can summon them there. Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember when they added that in too, but there is this process of culminating at the beginning of the zone, right, and then just all going in together. And in Modern with the matchmaking, it kind of takes that step out, right? Because you can be anywhere in the world, matchmake, and then when you're ready to go, it just pulls up a screen and you just go there. You know what I mean? So it's not like, there's something to be said for, like, if we were to ever do Shadowfang Keep, because it's in the Horde zone, we would get there. We'd have to get there, And so it's a bit of so even like back in the day, getting all of the flight points for all of the zones that you need to get to the dungeons was an important part of the process, right? Because if someone wanted you to do Shadowfang Keep, you didn't want to have to wait for that person to go run right to the towns that the closest. And that's probably why, for instance, we discovered that Duskwood has a Horde outpost. There's probably a flight path point there for them to get, close enough to whatever is over there. I don't know what the reason is that Horde need to be over there, but you know what I mean? So it's like, it's just another.
Yeah, I don't know. It almost felt like it was like apothecary something or other, and I thought, well, maybe this is like some weird Horde cooking thing, or I don't know.
It could be. Yeah, we'd have to go check it out. But anyway, it's just an interesting point about the different process, right? And kind of almost like the mental differences with sort of like embarking on this journey to go to this castle like Shadowfang Keep. As a Horde character or as an Alliance character, would probably have been a process.
It's to some degree, it's a difference between like Disney World when we were children and Disney World now with all its fast passes and whatever line jumping ways of do things, everything being scheduled and having a million things to do in the park with apps and all this other stuff that just wasn't there when we were kids, right? I mean, and so there's just there's definitely theme park analogies as well to Classic and Modern too.
We earned it back in the day. We
had to have our tickets.
There was no other option.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, those are the zones. I guess we could hit. Do you want me to hit the MMO mechanics in really quick?
Yeah, let's talk about the combat mechanics, and then we'll take a quick break before doing email.
Okay. Yeah, the topic that I keep forgetting in our previous episodes to talk about that really jogged my memory yesterday when we were playing in the wetlands. We were doing some elite quests that are out in the zone, so it wasn't in a dungeon, and they were basically just essentially at camps and this little small outposty town thing. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility in that situation versus a dungeon that tends to be, more hallway based and more linear or what have you. So you have fewer options on sort of approach. But MMOs have always been hilarious to me, being such a big RPG player before MMOs were really a thing, because of the sort of like limitations that they have because of the choice in design and sort of world structure of being a persistent game. So they have a great advantage because of the persistence. And for me, that's one of the sort of revelatory things, and always has been, and why I think I fell so deeply in love with MMOs in general. And even though I do play WoW and talk about how much I play WoW, I do play other MMOs and have played quite a bit of them. Most of the big ones I've played as they've come out. That persistence, though, and thus lack of essentially a save game sort of loop, right? Where you're like, oh, I'm going to try this combat out. Oh, I died. Okay, I'm going to try it this way. Okay. But with MMOs, you don't have that. So they have to build in these sort of, I'm calling them silly mechanics, but it's just sort of the mother of the, or the mother of necessity of necessity is the mother of invention when it comes to, okay, we're persistent, so we can't do certain things like save the game. So the logic behind how monsters are spawning and how they aggro and when they aggro and sort of the technicality of aggro distances and the concept of pulling, which was a thing that really wasn't a term really too much before MMOs. It creates this sort of like almost ridiculous mechanics to me on how you approach combat. And so last night or yesterday when we were playing, we just have this camp that's full of elites and we need somebody in the middle of the camp, right? And just as a hypothetical, which we did, but we needed some additional ones, but let's, to simplify the example. And so Brett is trying to pull, right? And we're trying to pull as few as possible because we can probably only take 2, maybe 3 on at a time. 3 was pushing it. And we actually had some pretty rough moments there when we had like 5 or 6. We still survived. I'm really proud of us. But it forces you to sort of think very weirdly about how to approach combat compared to other RPGs or traditional sort of single player RPGs, because you don't want to die because, there is no save game. So you have to run back. And it's really sort of like, it's sort of a design based on exploitation in a way. You're exploiting the AI both in how they go aggro against you based on who you're pulling, but also how they're linked, how close they are to other mobs. And so the sort of almost the tactics, if you can call them that, are sort of like based on using the limitations of the technology against itself.
Right.
Because you could, in a single player RPG, if there was a camp like that, like we were playing, there's a design intent with that camp of like, okay, the player's going to come in from this direction, or they could come from any direction, but we're going to have it like a Witcher or something, right? We're going to have it be based on this, and the AI is going to do this, and they could just run in the middle if they want and then run away or reload or whatever. But here you don't have that luxury. And so you kind of have to be really methodical and think about who might pull what, and then see what happens when you pull one and see who comes, and you're always surprised when only one comes and you thought more would come. It's
right,
just a very
like
fascinating.
When we took the top one, it's like we had a warlock, something, iron dwarf,
dark iron
dwarf
warlock, which was odd, but a named guy.
And a named guy. Yeah, he was kind of our main target, and being able to pull him through his summoned void walker thing. Yeah, it was just like
so funny.
I timed it perfectly. The Void Walker just kind of drifted away from the bigger group at the right time, and it all just went like, oh, we just pulled the one. Like,
yeah.
How did that happen? And it was just, there was a little bit of luck there because just as I fired, it kind of wandered even further away, and it just all kind of pulled nicely. But yeah, you really are sort of imagining the top-down view of like overlapping circles of like, exactly. Oh, if it's this close to that, it's going to pull that, and because that one then overlaps this, we're going to get a chain reaction and pull 6 things. Yeah. When we really only want to face the 1 or 2 at most.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Actually, and much more succinctly than I was trying to get to. I think what it really is. And I'll use another Blizzard game as an example. With Diablo, the radius of an enemy sort of aggression is a lot more hidden to you. And in fact, Diablo, because it's such a group-based encounter system where you're usually fighting large groups of enemies, oftentimes you're getting like nearly the whole screen knows you're there, right, of enemies. You're just kind of like wading through things, right? And to your point, like in an MMO setting, and WoW is a good example because I think they refined this best in this, at least in 2004, they were the best at refining this stuff. You're essentially having to almost like see what the developer sees to actually utilize it in a especially like in the elite situation that we had, utilize it in an effective way to not just ruin your night.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like you have to think, okay, what is the radius? Who will be linked to whom? So I don't cause too big of a train. We had a couple train situations that were pretty long, but WoW, as opposed to EverQuest, put in a lot more sort of player protection mechanics that EverQuest didn't have, and systems that prevented sort of like complete nonsense that would happen in EverQuest. But you kind of you have to think about like where the radii are for each of all of these enemies, and judge how close together they really are. You know, sometimes you can't tell, and it's just it feels to me in MMOs, that sort of like the camp situation that we had yesterday, it always had felt to me like it was just a janky system that you're trying to exploit. You know what I mean? You're trying to like trick it into doing what you want it to do because you know it's a video game.
Right.
Versus it being designed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the reasons, of course, is that, you know, it being an MMO, right, you need to, because of the way these sort of circles and aggro works, I mean, effectively it's a 2D game.
Right.
It's 3D rendered, but the game actually takes place on a plane, which means that, I mean, that's why circles are chosen. Oh, well, that's the fastest possible thing to check the distance between 2 points, right? Because you don't even need the distance, you need just the square of the distance. So it's a pretty simple like thing to figure out. I mean, they have to optimize it further on top of that, but it's the simplest possible representation to do this sort of what's my nearest neighbors and are they close enough and all of that stuff, to be able to support that number of players. And because you're running this game, the combat aspect of this game, all on one machine probably, you know, or one per zone or something like that. And that gets expensive, right? I mean, when you have to care about, you know, what's the closest thing to, you know, any given object and be doing this test on some frequency, it's expensive. So you have to, and especially, you know, 15 years ago, right, to have servers for
everybody, right? I mean, the combat that we're having, anybody on the server, technically in the zone, could come and watch us do that combat.
Correct.
And it would have to work.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, it's issues like that, you know, of scale that are, you know, they're the same problems that they've had, that MMOs have always had. I mean, you go back to even like the Ultima Onlines, you know, they were doing combat basically the same way because that's the most efficient possible representation to do these kinds of tests.
Right.
You know, they add some line of sight, but that can be done on the player's side. You know, basically, when you choose to fire, right, it can do a simple physics collision and just tell you no. They can verify that on the server if they want. You can actually use GPUs and stuff to accelerate the physics at that point, but fundamentally, the main means of doing this stuff is through circles. You know, circles and points, and if you step inside that circle, that's when they come after you.
Right.
And the same with the chaining. So
yeah, like you said, there's just a few different small, simple, sort of very game development simulation based tools that players use to exploit the system to do what they want it to do. Like you said, yeah, there's reasons that they build it that way. But then, like you mentioned, line of sight, like there's distance of the circles, and then line of sight is another tool that people would exploit, right? And in fact, in that evening when we were playing, you did that a couple times when, you know, you pull somebody, either you need line of sight or you pull somebody out and they're firing at you, but not leaving their building or what have you. And so you move out of sight. So it forces them to come out, you know, so, and that's just like, it's almost a kind of an exploitation of their AI, right? In the way that it works. And you're doing that to prevent another enemy from coming with them, because you don't want to go in to get them. And that Voidwalker situation you mentioned is another good example, because it's just so hilarious to me, because if you would have pulled him directly, you probably would have gotten, you know, one or two others with him, and that would have wiped us, because he was a pretty high level himself. But because you pulled the Voidwalker, it was just the little exploit we needed to trick the system, right? And then my whole point of this whole thing is, in an MMO context, that is considered gameplay. It's like,
right.
It's like, but you play a Witcher, you play another big RPG, I don't know, a Dragon Age or something, and the game, the gameplay is much deeper and richer, and there's a lot more interesting sort of encounter design and level design and stuff. And here, like, we spent hours around these camps fighting these mobs who were standing there. Occasionally there was a patrol that we had to worry about or whatever. And then there's the respawn, right? So there's these silly little simple rules that are combined together to sort of eke out this concept of gameplay. But because of the persistence, it's just a whole different beast for me. And I love it for that, but it's also, when I think about it from a designer's perspective, it's so ridiculous sometimes.
That is true. And you know what's ridiculous? We've spent another hour talking about World of Warcraft. Let's take a quick break.
In us. I
thought for sure 30 minutes and we're out. Yeah. Let's take a quick break, come back and do some feedback.
Okay.
Welcome back from the break. We've got a little email. Before we do that, since this is Chrono Trigger feedback, I want to do my book recommendation, which I had written down and yet forgotten last week.
Right. Of course.
I know.
Please go ahead.
Bizarre.
Can't wait for the time travel story.
Yeah, so this is one that's it's not your typical time travel story. It's Stephen King's 11/22/63. And what I love about it is that one of my takeaways was not leaning too heavily on the time travel and worrying too much about the implications of time travel. In 11/22/63, which is the date of the Kennedy assassination, John, rather, not Bobby. It's just a device. He doesn't lay out the rules. You don't think about it. It's just a thing.
No paradoxes.
He just uses it. There's no nothing. It's a curiously sweet tale as well. I mean, he's known as a horror author, and this is not one of his most horrifying books. Other than sort of the just natural horror of a presidential assassination. This is more just kind of in a different vein for him, and I really appreciate it. So I thought I would throw it out there. Mm-hmm. It is, of course, Stephen King, so it is also quite long. But, we're all home, and maybe it's one to take a look at.
Yep.
From back when we had presidents that we were sad to see assassinated. Anyway.
Holy cow. Wow. You heard it here, folks.
Yes. I'm kidding. Secret Service. Don't call me. Wow.
Yeah. The fact that I'm laughing as well is also telling for both of us.
Pretty dark stuff. Anyway. Let's move on to email. We've got a bunch of email about Chrono Trigger. We're going to try to move through it quickly. So go ahead with that first one, and then we'll talk about the next game on the other side.
Also, I wanted, at the end, after that, I want to do a special little message about my, just about my trip and stuff, just to bring people up to speed, because today was the day I was supposed to start. So, okay, so Chrono Trigger, should games include partially supported New Game Plus, from Sam Thomas. Hello, Chrono Trigger is memorable for a lot of reasons, but the amazing New Game Plus implementation is especially influential. I remember thinking when I finished it that every game should have New Game Plus. Well, it seems my wish has come true, and I've seen the consequences. Many modern games tack on a New Games Plus where it has very little impact. My design question is, if it's Easy to put a New Game Plus feature into your game should you do it for the minority of players that will actually enjoy it. Chrono Trigger did it with with lots of gameplay variety and many interesting endings to sample. Devil May Cry and Dark Souls use it as a way to increase the difficulty or fully explore combat options not available in the main game. But there are many examples where it's just a way to play through a game again minus all of the challenge. As a side note, I also do not enjoy the combat in Chrono Trigger, as it has held me back from replaying the game for a while. But your insights into what is going on in the story have me excited to give it another play. Thanks for the wonderful podcast. Yours is my number one, and I always push it to the top of my queue. Sam. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I'm still flabbergasted by that fact, but I'm proud of it too.
Sam's one of my best inventions. Yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, I do agree it can be very much a sort of like, hey, start the game over with all your stuff and now and just mow through things. I think there's a pleasure in that, so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I also think it's relatively few people will play a game again anyway. So it's really a matter of what are your goals? I mean, if you're just trying to have a little something for the people who really want to just keep going, sure. I mean, Diablo 3 has elevated that to an art form. That game is all New Game Plus.
Yeah.
But it actually ratchets up the difficulty and, constantly, basically, the numbers can always just keep going up. But they do give you new skills and things, I guess, and gear that ties it all together. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of fine with that. And I understand like that you're just kind of trying to pay off on all this work you've done and give a little more to the people who really love that thing. Whereas doing more with your new game plus, I think it has dubious rewards. But I think it's like back then adding more to a game was relatively inexpensive. And these days adding more to a game is quite expensive. And that's why we have things like DLC that are paid, right? When we put more into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not to give a cop-out answer, but for me, it definitely depends. It depends on so many variables, especially the way the world structure of the game is. And the story of the game. And he mentioned some good examples, but I think that, as you say, in the goals of their game, they have, in the sort of pillars that we talk about and takeaways for what their goals are for each game, like a Devil May Cry, which is sort of a, an expertise-based game, right? Where the art form of controlling your character is something that you can get better and better and better at, like a fighting game, so you can see there being interesting ways to do New Game Plus stuff. But it does heavily depend. I think, though, if I were to answer not as much of a cop-out way, I agree with Sam in that, in general, I think New Game Plus should have something not significant, but something interesting to offer. And I also am bummed when somebody just adds in a very basic version. It sometimes feels, and I think this is what he's getting at, to me as a developer, it sometimes feels like just a thing that they checked off a list because it's a thing that everybody has now, And,
yeah, I agree with that.
And to your point, like, yeah, why not, for the people who just want to get more out of it. But I think even the people that want to play it on a higher difficulty end up most of the time being disappointed that that's all it is too. Like, I'll give you an example that
that shows you some limitation of that game, right? I mean, like, there really isn't more here.
Yeah. So one example that I'm really, really kind of, I have a lot of inner conflict about right now is because I do want to start essentially their New Game Plus is Breath of the Wild. Because I love the heck out of that game. I think I'm at 200 plus hours. I did literally almost everything. The only thing I didn't do was get all of the seeds or the nuts or whatever.
The Koroks, yeah.
Yeah, the Korok seeds, which I still actually might go back and do, which is ridiculous that if I actually do that. because they literally give you a piece of poo if you do it. It's hilarious. That's the reward. But they have a
That's
master.
very Japanese.
They have a master mode that is sort of a new game plus. And as far as I've been told, I haven't tried it yet, but as far as I've been told, all it is a much harder version of this same exact game. And that bums me out because I think that they could have done with that world and the expansiveness of that game and how much there is there. They could have done some pretty interesting things with it. So that's an example, a modern example that feels like a bit of a cop out. But yeah, I agree with them.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I see it as a player too. So, yeah, I'm kind of two minds. Well, as a developer, like, I do think like they're leveraging our nostalgia for good New Game Plus when they call it New Game Plus, and that's
yeah, maybe just
the real crime there. Yeah,
yeah.
You know, instead of just unlocking a different difficulty.
Yeah,
and commonly a thing.
Yeah, maybe to Breath of the Wild's credit, then they don't call it that; they just call it Master Mode, which is whatever.
That goes Master Quest from back the day.
Yeah.
All right, I have one here from Gabe Durham of Boss Fight Books. Juicy, Woolsey, and Slattery quotes. Hi, Brett and Tim. I'm Gabe Durham, the founding editor of Boss Fight Books.
Cool.
I'm really enjoying your series on Chrono Trigger, which is one of my favorite games and remains my favorite soundtrack. And my ears perked up when Brett mentioned he had a copy of our book on the game. It's been really interesting to hear you compare notes as you each play a different translation. And I think one chapter that would be of interest to you guys would be the interviews with Woolsey and Slattery. I agree, editorializing here. Woolsey was given so little time and space while working on the English text of the original that he was forced to get creative. And here's a big block quote. Essentially, I had to rewrite the game and retranslate huge chunks. I spent several weeks in Tokyo and later in Seattle doing just that. It might have been that Square management at the time underestimated the complexity of translating Chrono Trigger, or games in general. Looking back, I probably would have pulled back on some of the language play. When I was doing that, I sort of just channeled the original text, letting my brain play with the concepts. I can't say I was always happy with what came out in English, and certainly I pulled back a ton of shaping as the game cartridge didn't have the capacity for text overages. We had to cut to the bone. With Frog, I just realized that while he had an interesting tone in Japanese, it seemed slightly too close to the other characters conversationally. I felt like he was a heroic type, and I tried to amp that up a bit. Slattery, on the other hand, had fewer constraints, but had to consider the generation of Chrono fans his new version would upset. Again, in a block quote, my main goals were to undo the damage done by the character limits of the original version and to eliminate the inconsistencies that weakened the game's settings and characterizations. I expanded the enemy, item, and ability names that had clearly been compressed or altered to fit within the artificial length restrictions of the SNES release, but I retained virtually all of the character names. With dialogue, I worked from the existing text and mostly tried to tighten up what Ted had done. I love the caveman speak of Ayla and friends, for example, but it drifted around quite a bit. Sometimes they used articles and plurals, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes their subjects and verbs agreed, and other times they didn't. I loved that Frog didn't sound like the characters from present day, but it made no sense that he was the only character in his time period with an anachronistic style of speech, and the grammar wasn't consistent or even always used correctly. He says, additionally, with the new translation mess with canon, as in the gendering of Azala. As many have noticed, I made Azala female with a single instance of a feminine pronoun. Azala was Ayla's nemesis, the name sounded completely feminine, and the sprite looked like it was wearing a flowing pink robe. My brain had so unquestioningly taken the character to be the Reptite Queen from the start that it had never even occurred to me it might not be female. So no one called out my assumption, and it wasn't until after the game had mastered up that I noticed that there was no direct reference to the gender of any Reptite in the game. They may have been intended to be genderless, or gender may simply not have been seen as an important detail considering they're not human, but the Japanese version always avoids specifying. I actually just did a bit of searching to see whether Japanese players had interpreted the character as male or female, and saw that the Japanese Wikipedia article currently states the character is, quote, believed to be female because the English DS version refers to Azala as she. So I guess I've successfully confused Japan too. Durham goes on, and although they did not work together on the game, both Woolsey and Slattery seem to have a lot of respect for each other. A last bit of personal trivia. The book's author, Mike Williams, and I did not know each other when I first contracted his book, but we got along great, and he became an editor at Boss Fight, eventually working on all the future books with me for 6+ years now. Thanks for all you do, guys. All the best, Gabe. So there's some
Nice.
translation stuff, a lot more quoting than I would have done. But since it was sent from the editor, I feel it's fair game. And Mike, if you're listening, I really enjoyed your book, as I told Gabe. So yeah, some good stuff there.
That's great. Yeah, that's some great insight. Yeah, I love that they're doing the books they're doing. Like it's
yeah, they're terrific.
something
really
that should have been done so long ago, and there's a lot of catching up to do now, I think. So, and they're really kind of the only ones doing it to that degree, I feel like.
Yeah, it's almost like there should be a book club for games.
Yeah, a book club for games, for books about games. Where you
pretty soon we'll be doing a book club of books in games.
Yeah. Oh, Skyrim, here we come. Yeah, or really every Elder Scrolls game. That's what we should do, a book club on the books throughout Elder Scrolls games.
We really shouldn't.
That's a nightmare.
I didn't read them then.
Okay. Next one.
Yep.
Chrono Trigger from David from Houston. Hi, Brett and Tim. I've listened to DGC for years, and I thank you for making such a consistently great show. I know deep down in my heart that one day you would play Chrono Trigger and that Tim would love it for many of the reasons you have already talked about. I've called Chrono Trigger my favorite game of all time, the second being Earthbound. He's a theme there. For many years after playing it in middle school. At the time, I went through and got all the endings. Wow. I put the haste helm, the gold stud on Chrono, let him solo. Oh, that's okay. Let him solo Lavos, not bothering to keep the other party members alive. I was pumped about getting the ending where Chrono finally talked. Whoa. This is blowing my mind. I guess I have a hard time getting to this mail. What would our spiky hair hero finally say? It turned out to be something kind of lame. Like, let's go have fun.
Be sure to drink your Ovaltine.
Right, exactly. My favorite ending was probably where Chrono and Marley hold on to a couple of balloons and float dangerously high above the earth while the excellent track Too Far Away Times plays. No, that sounds neat. Times have changed, and I've since played games like Breath of the Wild, Bloodborne, and Witcher 3. Chrono Trigger doesn't sit atop the throne anymore, but it does still have my favorite game soundtrack. I probably enjoy playing 3 games mentioned before more than Chrono Trigger, but couldn't hum any of their songs for you. Anyways, what are your favorite game soundtracks? The Black Wind Howls. David from Houston.
Yeah, let me read this one from Mikhail Danielson as well, because it addresses music, and then we'll talk about that on the other side. This is on Chrono Trigger and music. Greetings, gentlemen. Your playthrough of Chrono Trigger was an absolute delight to listen to, so thank you very much for that. Can't tell you how relieved I was when you first announced that you'd be extending it by one more episode because of all of the end game content. Like so many other avid RPG fans, Chrono Trigger holds a very special place in my heart. While my first introduction to the genre may have been the Phantasy Star series, I'd probably have to give Chrono Trigger equal credit, or maybe even more, for really getting me into RPGs. I may be wrong about this and somehow totally forgot you talking about it throughout the series, but I can't really remember there being much discussion about the game's music. Now, I might not know a lot about music, but I know what I like, and I simply love this soundtrack. I would hold this up as a shining example of the excellence game music was able to reach during this period in time. So I guess I'm just asking, what did you think of the music? Did anything in particular stick out for you? I was always partial to Robo's and Frog's themes myself. Yes. Robo's theme, in particular, made a big impact on me, partly because of the stark contrast to almost all the other sound design of 2300 AD. I'm always moved by the energy and what I can only describe as unbridled positivity of this piece. Anyway, I love these episodes and looking forward to hearing more about your adventures in Azeroth these past days. Best wishes, Mikhail. No paragraph for you this time. Yeah, I mean, so you can get a hint at my favorite music. If you listen to the episodes, I used my favorite tracks as the intro and interstitial musics. So Tim doesn't get a vote on those things. So you actually, if you listen to the episodes, you get mine. Corridors of Time is probably the one that sticks out the most. But I'm not good at humming theme tracks, so I don't know. Maybe that's what I'll use for the interstitial this time again.
Well, from your singing reviews, we know you're not good at humming anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel bad. This comes up from time to time where someone calls us out that we didn't talk enough about music. And I actually did have multiple notes about Frog and Robo's themes because I had them with me the whole time. And, you have a few extra opportunities to hear them if they're with you, I think. And I did make note probably in every episode, every note series for every episode, I probably mentioned music, and we should have talked about it more. I thought the soundtrack was amazing. And, we've played a handful of 16-bit and maybe some 8-bit games in over the course of the years. And I am always impressed by, like, for instance, Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, I thought had a great soundtrack.
Yeah, true.
As well, sort of in a similar, vein. And I'm always impressed by soundtracks for 16-bit stuff because, if it does make an impression, I feel like that must be much more difficult than an orchestral sort of situation. Not being a musician and not being good at talking about music, as you can tell, I just am always impressed by that. But Frog's theme specifically is probably my favorite. And the moment that I'll mention that Brett probably didn't see, it's just so cool that I can say that, and that there's things that neither of us would have seen even in our first playthrough. When you go back to the court in 600, and you go into the king's chambers and the queen's there and everything, and I don't remember the dialogue specifically, but there's an exchange that happens there between the king, the queen, and Frog. And they basically tell him, the gist of it is, thank you for saving the kingdom. We would love for you to be the captain of the guard, the knight, right? They're basically giving him the commander's role. Like, we want you to run, to be the head knight. And he very humbly says, thank you. It's an honor, but he declines. He doesn't think he's worthy. I think he says something like that. And they're playing his theme as soon as you come in, but it's initiated by you because you have to go up and talk to them. They don't just say it. You go up so it's an opt-in. You talk to the king, he says, and then Frog's theme starts playing as they start talking.
And it's not easy being green, right?
It's right. Yeah, exactly. Oh boy. Wow, we got this far without a Kermit reference. I'm surprised by that. But
it was heartfelt.
Yeah, it was heartfelt, and it was not something you'd see unless you chose. There's no reason you had to go.
That was a Kermit joke, but okay.
Oh no, I missed that one.
Felt.
Heartfelt. Got it. Wow, that's a puppet joke, not just a Kermit joke. Jesus. Get a big old geez on that one. But the thing is like, this wasn't part of a quest, right? So like, you had to choose to go back a second time to talk to them for no good reason. And then you get this unique dialogue, and then his theme plays, and he says exactly what you want Frog to say, right? He declines. He says he's not worthy, and then you kind of leave, but it's just such a touching moment. I also love Robo's theme as well. I think both of them really stuck with me.
As far as soundtracks generally go, I think some of my favorites, couple ones that come to mind, are from the 360 era in particular. I remember really enjoying Mass Effect's music. That whole series. I mean, part of that is it's three long games. So I probably heard it a lot, and it's just kind of in there. Actually, Halo's soundtrack I've always loved.
Yep.
and not just because Brock Starr sang it in the bathroom for the Red Sox a year or two ago. And then Red Dead Redemptions. I'm a huge Western fan, and that soundtrack, it's a great soundtrack. It fits definitely in with like a spaghetti Western or something like that. And it incorporates sort of ambient sounds really, really well in a way that I think Kirk Hamilton wrote about once. So if I can track that down, I'll put that in the show notes. I'm not sure I'll be able to find that, but he does talk about how they weave in sounds of the environment into the music in a perfect way that it just sounds like it's part of the soundtrack as well. So a few that come to mind.
I forgot to mention mine. Yeah. My number one for a long time now has been Shadow of the Colossus. It's actually maybe the only like CD sound of a soundtrack that I've ever purchased and have listened to, after the fact. Obviously I don't use the CD anymore, but I still have the CD. Shadow of the Colossus I really love. I tend to like pretty ambient soundtracks, and it's got some really nice glorious music when like the boss battles start and stuff, but it's also very, very somber and ambient. The other one that you're gonna laugh at, because it's really hard to talk about because it's not like a soundtrack, it's like a series of soundtracks, is World of Warcraft soundtrack.
Of course. Oh my God, this guy.
Well, so the music department at Blizzard for WoW is actually a very good group. And
the music's good. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know. They've created a lot of diverse, obviously because of all the expansion packs and stuff. And I think, regardless of it being MMO soundtrack music, when you're playing a game this long and you hear certain tracks as much as I have, they just kind of like, whether you love them or not, they're in your head, and and they just they just become some of your favorites. So, but I would say Shadow of Colossus is my favorite.
I would also throw Peter McConnell out there, just really any of them. To be honest.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I actually own the one CD I own is Psychonauts. I love klezmer music. And that whole thing is so good. So such a great soundtrack. And the one for Grimm would be another personal
Grimm's
favorite
really
of
good.
his.
Grimm's really good. A lot of the LucasArts stuff, Peter and Clint.
Clint Bajakian as well. Yeah, Outlaws was a really good one too. So.
Yeah.
And that's Clint. Anyway, so there you go. There's a whole bunch. The show notes are going to be long. I'll have so many references this
We're just
why don't you go read the first Ryan email. I have a second Ryan after that.
Okay, Chrono Trigger from Ryan. Hope you guys are safe and staying sane. There are some small things that you might have seen, but don't remember you talking about on the cast. He has a bulleted list here. The first one is you can change the character in the lead's name in the ruins in 65 million BC, and you can change the epoch's name using a computer in the Keeper's Dome. Oh, okay. Yeah, I did write a note on that. Forgot to mention it.
I found both of those. I mean, a lot of these topics I think I've seen and it just didn't warrant further discussion.
Yeah. But I thought it was funny that they had the blue guy, the construct guy he's just there. I think the first time you meet him, he actually coughs up an item for me, I think, before he gives you the option to change your name. He coughs up an item that I actually ended up using.
That might be true. I don't remember.
The second one he has is Lucas' dad, Teban. If you visit him throughout the game, he will give Luca gear. I think we talked a little bit about that, but yeah, that was a cool thing because it was uniquely named gear that only she could use. Specchio, I'm not even sure who that is.
That's at the end of time. That teaches you the magic.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Can be fought multiple times in 6 different sprite versions depending on the lead level's character. 0 through 5, 6 through 19, etc. And gives various rewards each time. Oh, really? Rewards?
Yeah. I played Specchio. I fought Specchio a second time with Magus, Chrono, and maybe Marley. And I put in my notes, yo, you've been working out, bro? because he's huge. He looks like this giant blue muscly thing instead of the sort of sheep looking doll from the first level.
Oh, so that's cool.
I did come back.
That's cool that it gives rewards. I need to. Oh man, this game, there's so much. Ayla's fists actually level up. If she is high enough level, they become iron and then bronze fists. That's amazing.
That's wild because I use her a lot and I never saw that. So I was surprised by that.
Huh. If you talk to Malchior after Rainbow Shell and Sunstone Quest, you can get Chrono's best weapon, the Rainbow Sword, which I did get. Yes, I did mention it. And I made another note that jogs my memory. One, even though as you get armor throughout the game, it doesn't change the character art, the swords that you use for both, at least for, well, probably for everybody, but specifically for me, it was Chrono and Frog. The effects on the swords do change and the swords themselves change. So at least you get some, visual change for items. But the Rainbow Sword is cool because the effects for the Rainbow Sword swinging, and slashing was rainbowy. And then the last one, in order to get the New Game Plus, you have to go through the Black Omen. Okay. And you can...
That's the floating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, though. That's what I happened to do, but I didn't know you had to do it. You can do it 3 times, but you could also choose to crash the Epoch into Lavos in 1999. What? Doing this lets you skip the first form of Lavos in the fight. What the heck? This is... Thanks for the cast and entertainment over the years, Ryan. I just feel like that list is
bio.
Endless.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's bio?
There's so many. Yeah, that's bio. Yeah, there's so many things in this game. I mean, there's a lot of those little topics that we don't really pick up just because they are... they're indicative of something about the game holistically, I guess. And maybe that's a good time to come back to it as in mail and just go, really? You can do that? Et cetera. Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. I have the second one here from another Ryan. This is Magus' story. Brett and Tim, first time, long time. Hearing that Brett picked up on the Janus Magus connection with his Black Wind comments got me thinking about another piece of foreshadowing. In ancient Roman religion and myth, Janus is the god of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, and endings. He's usually depicted as having 2 faces, since he looks to the future and to the past.
Wow.
Yeah, man. Are you not familiar with world cinema? Janus films, very, very well known, especially in like the 60s, 70s.
No, I guess not.
With the 2-faced god.
No.
Yeah, I knew that about Janus, but I didn't think about it in this connection.
Nice.
And it is, in fact, Magus who set this whole adventure into motion. Listening to your podcast reminded me of a wonderful treatise from user SSDN on Reddit. I'll put this in the show notes. It's probably far too long to read on the show, but does more justice than I ever could for the story of my favorite character in this game. And while there are many Frog as the main character truthers out there, I have always thought of this as Magus' story. There's the link. Side note, in the remake of Final Fantasy VII, there's an NPC named Marl, and I was surprised to hear it pronounced Marl. Love the show, Ryan. Yeah, I wish I'd written it down because in the Williams book, he says what the name is in Japanese, and I was like, oh, and I was like, so that's how you would pronounce it, and now I've forgotten what it was. But yeah,
I was kind of on the fence on whether it would be Marl or Marley.
Yeah.
So it's funny that he mentions that because when you read that letter last time about Frog being the main character,
from
the game,
James,
and you had sort of hinted that was the topic. I completely thought you were going to say Magus, because I guess in my head, logically, that's who I would have picked. Like, I love the truther sort of theory that Frog's the main character because I like Frog, and like that would be my personal choice just because I like the character. You know what I mean? Because I want that to be the case. But when I think logically about the story itself and the structure, it does feel like it's Magus' story because of how he plays into everything. You know what I mean? And I'm not surprised that Chrono Cross seems to continue that. Right?
It's at least tied in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it basically involves that Dream Devourer and Scala
But it's about that family.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, in a way. And I feel like that family, especially with the Queen and the Black Omen, and right, I feel like the Queen, Scala, and Janus are all, and / Magus is, you know what I mean? Like kind of like a lot of the genesis of this sort of the crux of the spine of the story is about them. So that's what I thought you were going to say. So now it makes sense that Ryan's saying that.
Well, you can go and read the whole Reddit thesis if you care to. It'll be in the show notes. So that's it. That's what we've got for feedback. You want to let's talk about your non-trip.
Yes,
the day before Earth Day.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be Earth Day when it comes out.
Yeah, really quick. I just want to give people an update. Obviously, I'm not, as we talked about, I'm not going on the trip. I would have been starting literally today that we're recording this on a Tuesday, 21st. Happens to be John Muir's birthday. The reason I want to bring it up is I have had people donate to the site and pledge, et cetera, et cetera. And so that I'm not going to sort of like, cancel that yet. I'm going to see how the summer goes and see if there's an opportunity to do some sort of trip. And so I might sort of, redirect in some ways, but I'll keep people posted on that. And I'm going to keep that site up, and I still maybe even will blog about things related to wilderness travel and stuff, depending on how the summer goes. But I just want to let people know that it's not, there may be something happening this summer. We'll see how the virus goes if things open up. Pacific Crest Trail specifically has been extended to June 1st as far as the closures go. And so even a southbound trip seems unlikely, even if I could get a permit, so which is unlikely as well. So, but if something does happen, I still may sort of turn the charity event into just another trip, a shorter trip. So I'll just keep people posted on that. But I would have started today, so I guess it'll be another year. That is all.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, since we can't go traipsing off into the forest, instead we should take some time to turn to the comfort that little towns can bring as we look to our next game.
We're going to shelter in place.
We're going to shelter in place. Oh, my God, what a great turn of phrase there. With Animal Crossing for the GameCube. This is a series that has recently seen a new title, which seems to have come at precisely the best possible time imaginable.
Yeah.
There's no way to predict something like this, but boy, I mean, you can't even buy a Switch right now because people want to play that game.
Yeah. Nintendo's so happy right now.
Yeah, they really,
I mean, not happy,
yes,
but
right. I get you.
There's a silver lining.
They caught a zeitgeist. It's not the best zeitgeist, but they caught it nonetheless, and they are reaping the rewards. So yeah, we thought we would look back on this title. I don't think it'll be a long series because it is kind of it's a difficult one for us to even sort of schedule and say do this or do that. So what we've decided instead to do is play an hour every day for the period of time that we play this game. So that I guess yours is coming on Thursday, the 23rd. Hopefully it'll get there in time. You can play an hour that day. I will start playing the day you're hearing this. I'll probably stream for an hour where I just walk around. I'm pretty sure I have a town from the original game on a memory card. And it has been probably 15 years since I've been to that town, and so I can just imagine what it looks like these days. You sort of see weird end game content, I guess. And then I'll start a new game at that point.
Maybe there's zombies walking around or something.
Yeah, right. I was playing that with my two sons back then. They didn't really get into it, so that's why it just got abandoned. But I think there are 2 or 3 players in that game.
I think it's gonna be an interesting discussion because it's like its influence on the industry, I think, is going to be. I have some, I think, unexpected opinions about that. So I'm excited.
Oh yeah, you do. I know. So we'll go from massively multiplayer to asynchronous multiplayer, and play some Animal Crossing over the next 2-3 weeks. we will probably 3 weeks. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll just have
really
to play by ear. It's a weird one.
I'm really curious. It is a weird one. And then we have another game picked out for the other side of that. But yeah, that's what's next. I mentioned already that you'll be able to find me playing that on my Twitch stream. I will play my hour and then play what I'm playing the rest of the time, which lately is Wasteland 2. That's at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. You can find the show on the web at devgameclub.com, where we keep the show notes, and on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longwood Jr. with a JR at the end.
Thanks for those of you who sent email to devgameclub@gmail.com. And a reminder, we love your reviews. We haven't had one in a while, and we would love some more. I also throw out there each time that our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. So thanks to both of them. Have fun playing games this week. And good night.
Good night.
Man, we managed to get in. This is not the Tonight Show. 15 minutes. It's dun 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 dun.
That's good. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thanks.